wonderful being in our own place.
Yeah.
And so we'll be starting up again in 2 Corinthians. So as usual, I start off with a little COVID. It's still around. Still be careful. Probably be a little bump with the holidays, with people getting together. So be careful. If you're sick, stay home, because there's other things going around too. Okay, this time I'll open us up with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for having us to have a home now. Lord, lead us to your kingdom. We're going to be studying your word. Open our minds and our hearts to it. We know that even after all these many years, it is fresh, for our human experience is still the same. Lord, thank you for the blessings that we have, the freedom that we have to study your word. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Amen. So we're then in a section of 2 Corinthians where Paul has been basically defending himself against some rivals. He somewhat sarcastically called them super apostles. He got pretty rough on them at the end of the last passage, basically calling them minions of Satan. The issue that basically was going on is that Paul did not fit the Hellenistic Greek vision of what a leader of a religion or a teacher would have been. They thought it was somebody that had noble prestige. They did not think much of anybody that brought themselves up from poverty. They thought that somebody had to have noble parentage to be somebody that was worth listening to, that was physically fit, wealthy, and honored, and not somebody that worked by their hands. Paul also had not accepted their gifts, and their culture, gifting was not like our Christmas gifting. It was, if you gave a gift to somebody, they had an obligation to give something back. And if you had a higher status, you couldn't give them back as much as they gave you, so you gave them honor and they became your patron. You basically had to listen to what they said. And Paul, while accepted help from churches that he'd already set up, would not accept help from them, because that he wanted the independence, the freedom to speak the word. Paul's was trying to tell them that they should not be looking at the messenger, they should be looking at the, listening to the message. And he wanted to make it quite clear. He tended to often belittle himself somewhat ironically about how good a speaker, how good a writer he was. He obviously must have been very good. And so we actually do pay our pastors now. But do we have a problem sometimes that people take advantage of church groups, come in and take advantage of church groups?
Yeah.
Yeah. In what way do they take advantage of church groups?
There's been instances where people turn over their total wealth to the church, like the one in Japan.
Right, that's exactly right. In fact, I was reading the paper this morning, the Japanese parliament has passed a law somehow restricting that kind of behavior. Moon's church, it's out of Korea, the Unification Church, basically took people's money, all their money. There's been other situations, basically cults that did that. So do you think that was an issue back then? Back in Paul's time?
I think it's always been an issue.
Yeah, so it's always been an issue. There's always been some people that will try to act like they're doing good, and they're doing good for themselves. I'm going to take a little tangent before we get into the word. There is a book that was written maybe a century or so after Paul, and it's called the Dash. There's actually two complete copies of it, and it's had the title basically that teachings of the 12 apostles, but it actually has nothing to do with the 12 apostles. It was basically a community manual, how would a Christian group take in pagans, how would they do things. And so obviously it was important at the time, early on when the Christian church was starting to grow, before it actually became more powerful later on in Roman times. But it's interesting in that they had to deal with that issue. And so, remember that hospitality was important, and they had itinerant preachers and itinerant Christians moving around, and they didn't have, hotels and inns and things like that to the extent that we did, so it was important for somebody to take somebody in. But they wrote how to deal with somebody, and this is from them. Let anyone who comes in the name of the Lord be received with hospitality. Then, when you have tested him or her, you will know whether he is good or evil. So you needed to listen to what they had to say, listen to whether or not their gospel was correct. For you will have an understanding of the right and the left, of good and evil. If on one hand the one coming is a traveler passing through, help him or her as much as you are able. So somebody just passing through, you should help them. But if he or she will not remain with you more than 2 or 3 nights, if there's any some necessary. So if they're going to stay a short time, help them. On the other hand, if one is coming, wants to settle among you, and knows a trade, let him or her work and eat. If someone does not know a trade, use your own judgment to determine how he or she should live with you as a Christian without being idle. If someone does not wish to cooperate, he or she is a Christ peddler. Be on guard against somebody. So, even almost 2,000 years ago, they're trying to deal with this and had written up actually a manual of how to deal with somebody coming in. They called them Christ peddlers, somebody acting like they're and so this is quite a bit of change in the culture, in the sense that in the past, we talked about how the teachers and the preachers would have, be good, really good in rhetoric, speaking, and very charismatic, and that's how they get paid. And so they're saying now in this manual how to live a Christian life, how to have a Christian community, that if somebody came, they had to do some work, do what Paul did. Paul had his profession that he worked on, and that kept him going. Does that make sense? Well, that's kind of how we do things now. So many really small churches, that have a part-time pastor For a long time, we had Pastor Ian Sakai, and he never actually took any salary from us. He had his own job that he paid for. So we're going to be starting with 11 and 16. So Dennis?
I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then receive me just as you were a fool, so that I may do a little boasting.
So he's going to be starting his fool speech, which is what he's been talking about for a while. And basically he's trying to show to them that they've been foolish by listening to his rivals. And so he's going to be somewhat making a parody, being sarcastic, being ironic in that. So if you take me, I'm not a fool, but if you take me for a fool, what does that usually mean you're saying? You're a fool.
Simpler, yeah.
So he says, you know, I repeat, let no one take me for a fool. So he's making it quite clear that's what he really means. But if you do receive me just as you would a fool, so I may do a little boasting. So he's saying, well, if you're going to be like that, I'm going to show you how foolish that really is. Melanie? 17.
When I am saying in this manner of boasting, I don't speak as the Lord would, but as it were foolishly.
Yeah. So NIV is, in this self-confident boasting, I'm not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. So he's making it quite clear. He's not talking like he normally would be preaching. He's not speaking the word. He's showing them how foolish they have been. Okay, Linda? 18, please.
Okay. This is the New King James Version.
Yeah.
Seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast.
Yeah. So it innovates pretty close. Since many of you are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. So in the Bible, you know, the flesh is often, as it is in King James, really means the world, how the world is. Not speaking in flesh in the sense of the body, but the world. And when they say the flesh, they're talking about the world. So that's why the NIV has changed it. So what's he saying here? He's saying that I will boast like the world. And at this time, remember the way the speakers were taught in rhetoric is they puffed themselves up. They talked about how good a speaker, how good an educator, how good a leader I am. But Larry is just awful. You know, that was how they spoke. They puffed themselves up, and then they ran down their rivals. And so, well, he's saying, I'm going to speak like this. You've been listening to this, and so I'm going to speak like this and show you how foolish this is. Lee, 19, please.
You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise.
So, well, what kind of tone do you think this is? What would you think?
Sarcastic.
Sarcasm. You know, this is one reason you got to realize, as I've said in the past, that this is a letter. This is kind of a conversation. This is not a study where everything is straightforward. So he's being sarcastic here. So it's sometimes really important to understand the context of the verses and not take too much out of them just by themselves. And so he's being sarcastic. And so obviously he could write real well. I expect that he spoke real well too. So basically you say, since you put up with fools, that makes you really wise, right? Okay, 20 please.
In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you, or exploits you, or takes advantage of you, or pushes himself forward, or slaps you in the face.
Wow. So you put up with people basically that abuse you. What does that say about you? You know.
Idiot.
Yeah, so it's saying, you know, you put up with people that are doing bad things to you. I didn't do that, did I? You know, I didn't abuse you, I didn't exploit you, I didn't slap you in the face because you didn't do what I wanted you to do. Do some people put up with abuse? Yeah, we still have that problem now. People put up with abuse, and it's sad that people do that. Why would somebody put up with abuse? Why would they listen to Paul's rivals that were abusing them?
Some people are good talkers.
Some people are good talkers, yeah. So some people can convince you that, you know, the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. You know, they can convince you that, you know, I'm really doing this for your own benefit. You know, I'm really doing it because I'm trying to make you a better person, or for you to understand something better. I think that's just awful, but, you know, some people, as she said, are good talkers. Why else would somebody put up with abuse?
Some people put up with abuse because they don't know what the truth is. So they think that what you're saying is the truth, so you then follow those kinds of people. So you have to have a little bit of discernment to make your decisions. And people will prey on this. And when they find that you're, in quotes, your soft spot, they'll hone in on it. So you have to be aware of what's happening.
Do we still have this going on now? You know, obviously domestic violence is a lot of this, to be honest about it. And it's something that people unfortunately fall into. And there's a combination of somebody's a good talker, there's other elements. I'm sure that they were concerned that they would lose their community. You know, somebody was saying, if you don't follow what I'm doing, you're gonna get kicked out of that community. And we might translate that now as kicked out of the family, lose, you know, the support that people get and from the family. And so it gets to be really toxic. Which hopefully nowadays we do more and more to help, but there's still a lot of people in that situation. And in churches, we've seen that too. We can talk about Koresh and the Waco situations. I'm sure there's situations maybe not rising to the level that we hear about them, but there's been situations in the past where somebody was a very good speaker, picked certain verses out of the Bible and basically abuse people. You know, the paper I just saw somebody in Raymond, I think probably Utah, was sent to jail because he was having multiple wives, and many of them were underage. And so there's still people that do that, and we have to be careful about that. Okay, Joy? 21?
To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that.
Yeah. And so, what is he saying here? Is he again, what kind of tone is this?
It's still sarcasm.
It is still sarcasm. So I wasn't strong enough to beat you and harass you and exploit you and slap you in the face. And I just wasn't strong enough to do that. So sarcasm, I guess, was very much an art form back then. So now we get into the foolish boastings. Foolish boasting is the next section. Okay. So Jim, 21B, which starts with what everyone else dares to boast about.
Okay, what anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about.
So this is going to be a parody of them boasting, and so we'll get into this. And so this next section is really a parody, again going on with sarcasm and irony. And so if you were really boasting, Jim, about how good a preacher you are, what kind of things would you say? What would you think his rivals would be saying?
I don't know, they might just say, oh, you know, the way you make your analogies or something so clear, they're so vivid, or whatever they might be, or they may be challenging them on behavior at that time.
Anybody else want to take a shot at thinking about the boasting that his rivals would have been making?
They were trying to sound great, they were.
Yeah, they would be saying, I'm the best speaker, I'm the most knowledgeable about the gospel. These other guys don't know anything. I know all the secrets of the Lord. You can only get it from me. It's going to cost you a little bit, but you can only get it from me. I'm the one that knows it all, you know. And I'm so good. I'm rich and healthy, and
God has blessed me.
God has blessed me. And that, you know, I've had a silver spoon in my mouth all my life, and I've had no troubles in my life. Everything's been good. God has been really good to me. After we get through this, you can see that he is kind of turning it completely upside down, his boasting. And so that's why it's really a parody. Okay, where was I? Larry 22?
Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendant? So am I.
So, they might have been boasting, okay, we know more about, God because we're Jewish, we're from Israel. Were all the Jews at that time from Israel? No, they were in the diaspora even before what would happen later on with the Jewish war. And so they had Jewish groups all over the Roman area. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. So he was a Jewish, both religiously and ethnically. And so this is going back to what they would boast about. They again felt that somebody's parentage was important for their prestige. If you started off and your parents were, in our jargon, lower middle class, and you worked yourself up and became, quite wealthy, they did not think much of that. That's kind of, surprising to us, because we think that person is much more something to brag about than the one that got all his money from his parents. Is that correct? We tend to think it the other way around most of the time, that somebody has worked hard, done well, been lucky, and so if you look at the movies and things, that's usually the person that they think more highly of, and the person that's not as good is the one that got everything given to them. Now, that's not 100% true when you look at our past president, but that's how we tend to look at things. They thought about it differently, so sometimes we have to understand the cultural context of why he's saying things. Lance, we're up to
23, yeah.
23.
Are there servants of Christ? I'm talking like a madman. I'm a better one, with far more labors, many more imprisonments, far worse beatings, many times near death.
So, now he gets into parody. So what's he saying?
He's almost putting himself down more than boasting.
Yeah, he's putting himself down. He's saying, you know, I didn't have it really good. I had all these things happen to me.
But isn't he also saying that I've been through more trials than them?
Yeah,
Talking about that.
You know, I've
exactly.
been through more trials, I've experienced God more than them.
Exactly, that's what he's saying. He's saying, I had more trials, and so what Paul kept writing about is that God shows his power through my weakness. And so I didn't have it all great. These are all the terrible things. He'll go on and keep on listing them.
And he's also kind of walking away from, you know, his Jewish heritage, and saying that, you know, other speakers may have come and they were Israelites, or they were, you know, they were the chosen people, but that really doesn't matter.
And so he's saying these people are false prophets. Lee, look up Matthew 7:15 to 21. Matthew 7:15 to 21.
Matthew what?
Matthew chapter 7, verse 15 to 21.
A tree and its fruit. Watch out for false prophets.
Okay, this is Jesus speaking.
Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruits you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruits you will recognize them.
So is God's truth shown through somebody boasting about themselves?
No.
So how, Jesus tells us, how are we supposed to see if somebody is true? We're supposed to see
The fruit they bear.
the fruit they bear. So is it the speech that they make?
No.
What do they mean by fruit?
What they do.
What they
Lives
do.
live, yeah.
Yeah. And so we're supposed to look at their behavior to see the truth of them, and not saying that I am so good, I'm the best. They have to actually show that. And so if we're looking at it through God's eyes, through the gospel's eyes, who of these two, Paul or his rivals, was the one that bare the good fruit? Was it Paul or was it his rivals? Paul. And what was Paul's good fruit? What was he talking, what would you say his good fruit was? The Word of God, but what action, what was he doing that showed his good fruit? What could you say, this shows that Paul...
He wasn't boasting
I'm
about
sorry?
himself. He wasn't boasting about himself.
Wasn't boasting himself, but what would...
This wasn't his first church. His fruit was the other churches that he had made
Exactly,
around
so his
in
fruit
his
was the
travels.
people that he brought to the Word, the churches that he set up. Not that I went into a church that somebody else set up and was now reaping the rewards of that church, what the work that Paul had done. Paul had actually set up the Corinthian church, set up a number of other churches, brought a lot of people to the Lord. Were these other people doing that? It didn't look like it from the way Paul wrote it. So You know, Jesus says, look at what somebody is doing rather than what they're saying. Is that good advice?
And he shared his testimony, you know, how he had changed. You know, if you go back and read the other churches that he started in Asia Minor at that time, that's what he was doing. And then, like you say, then by starting up, then going and starting up those churches and getting them organized. And then the people in that area knew that in the region of Asia Minor were well acquainted that he had been beaten, left for dead in a few cases, so that you know, that showed his commitment and faithfulness to God.
And so his behavior, his actions, is where you should be looking at. You might be saying things that sound real good, but you got to look at their behavior is basically what Jesus and then Paul is saying. Dennis, now go back to 24.
24. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1.
Ooh. 5 times I've been flogged, basically. And anybody remember what somebody, what was flogging?
It was being whipped with lashes.
Whipped, but then they had little metal pieces.
Metal mold.
It really depends on how nasty they're going to be. So if they're really nasty, with multiple braids with metal or glass in it, sometimes it was just a whip. And so the Jewish, at least in Judea, the Romans had given them certain authorities. Remember from the Christ story, that the Jewish courts had some authority to settle disputes among themselves. And punishment was usually corporal, in this case whipping, flogging. They were not supposed to whip somebody to the point of death. In Christ's example, they had to go to the Roman government for a capital killing somebody. They could not kill somebody, but they could then flog them, beat them, whip them. And so this was 5 times this happened to them. Because 1 less than 40 was felt to be too much for somebody to survive. And so what was likely the problem here? It was, this was some kind of civil disturbance. So what kind of civil disturbance would Paul be causing that would cause him to be flogged, whipped by the Jewish authorities?
Well, he would be speaking to things that were just outrageous to the traditional Jewish leaders.
Exactly. So he was preaching the word. This was what he got from preaching the word, upsetting some of the Jewish leaders for the message of the gospel. And so this is basically proving that I really, the gospel is something very true and real to me, that I'd be willing to go through this. You think his rivals went through anything like this? No. Okay. And let's see, I think Melanie, you're next.
So why don't they phrase it like that, 40 lashes minus 1? Why don't they just say 39?
Good question.
I don't know really the answer. I have to look that up. I would guess it's showing mercy that they gave you 1 less than they could.
Oh.
But that's just a guess on my part. I could be wrong on that. You're right. I don't know why they would phrase it that way.
Because 40 was death and 39 was still
Almost near death. I don't know for sure why they would phrase it that way. I'll see if I can find an answer for that.
Number 25.
Yes, please.
3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent the night and a day in the open sea.
So he's going on with this list of these awful things that happened to me. Right? So this is It was really sarcasm. You know, these guys puffed themselves up, said how good they are, how my life has been such a blessing, nothing terrible has happened to me. Now he's saying all this. So what's this business, what's the difference between beaten by rods and whipping?
The
3
whipping-
times I was beaten with
The
rods.
whipping was done by the Jews, the rods were by the Romans.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, so I know I have a GT class when somebody can answer that one. So,
I read my notes.
and so, and so, the whipping was done by the Jews, beating with rods. Basically, it's a stick, beating them, and was done by what they call a lictor, but basically it was Roman authority was beating him. Why again was this done to Paul?
Well, the contrast here is that the other people that would come, the smooth talkers, so to speak, the Jews at that time believed if something, like if you had a bad, you had leprosy, or you had some illness, or some tragedy happened in your family, that was because of something that you did wrong. And so Paul is contrasting that and saying, well, that's who those folks are, but I've actually been through these things, and that's because I've been serving Christ, and because of my faith and because of the change that happened on the road to Damascus, this is where my life has taken me.
Should Paul have been beaten by rods? This is a real GT class.
No,
If somebody can answer that.
no, because he was a Roman citizen.
Yeah, so he shouldn't have been. And it was talked about in some other writings by secular people that some of the frontier authorities overstepped. Paul shouldn't have been beaten by the rods because he was a Roman citizen. He should have had a trial and had something else happen to him. But we'll talk, again, this is civil disobedience. Lena, can you look up Acts 16:22? We'll just talk about one of them. Acts chapter 16, verse 22.
You look in the book of Acts.
I know, but who will know where Acts
And
is?
Lee, while she's looking that up, I'm gonna have you read
You know your
14:9,
Bible real well,
Acts
eh?
14:9.
That's why I have to kind Bible study.
So 16:22.
Okay, Acts 16:22, that the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates tore off their clothes and commanded them to be beaten with rods.
Okay, so this is one of the times he was beaten with rods, not only him. And then he talked about stoning, so this is from Acts 14:9.
He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed.
Yeah. Oh, I must have written down the wrong one. But anyway, there's a number of acts that deal with things. I thought it was 14:9, but I guess I can't read my handwriting, which is not unusual. So it's mentioned in Acts, I'll have to look it up and get the right one, where he was stoned, and there's other hardships. Can you go ahead and read 27, please? No, I'm sorry, 26, I missed this chapter, verse.
26.
I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers.
And so, again, going on his list of things. Traveling back then, and even now is not always that safe, but traveling back then was often difficult. You know, if the rivers risen, getting across them would be hard. There's some economic discussions of what life would have been like back then, that where most of the people were agricultural, and unless there'd been a war or a famine, what would happen with the population? That there was, you know, a fairly stable area like Judea, where none of these things had been happening for a while, that they had about a 10% excess in population. Even Christ was taught as a carpenter. Everybody did some carpentry work. The basic person was a farmer, so he was a very poor person. But what happened to that 10% that really had nothing? And the men tended to become bandits that lived very long, and the women became prostitutes. And that's how the society was at that time. And so life was tough. And when you're on, and so when you're on the road, there was areas that there wasn't military around, or didn't really have the police like we had, so you had to deal with bandits. So people often traveled in caravans and had guards if they had anything valuable. So if you were traveling by yourself, you were at risk of being attacked. What happened that led to the story of the Good Samaritan? What happened to the person the Samaritan helped? What had happened to him?
He was attacked by bandits.
He was attacked by bandits. And so that was something that happened all the time. And just because you were poor, the person might be even poorer, and you might want your clothes if you didn't have anything else. So he goes on and lists all the things that happened to him. And you know, he's talking about my own countrymen. You know, so his own countrymen, he was in danger from them. Why was he in danger from his own countrymen?
Does he mean other Jews?
Yeah, that's who he's talking about. Why was he in danger from that?
He's preaching the gospel of Christ.
Yeah, he's speaking the gospel. There's multiple places in Acts that talk about that. And so, and if you get back into Acts, you can find out multiple verses he's talking about how his countrymen, the Jewish people, were persecuting basically him. But remember his story. How did he start off? What was his name first? Saul. So what was he doing while he was Saul before he came Paul?
Persecuting Jews.
Well, what kind of Jews?
Pharisee,
Christian Jews.
He was persecuting Christian Jews.
yeah.
And so he started off doing that. So he got treated like...
He approved the stoning of Stephen.
Exactly right.
The crowd asked him what to do, and he told them, go ahead.
Okay. Joy, 27?
I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked.
Naked, really in the Greek, translated as ill-clothed. Not that he was completely naked, he just didn't have very good clothes. So these guys were saying, life has been good for me. I'm, robust. I'm not, I'm not starved. I'm not so skinny it looks like I came from a concentration camp. I've had everything good for me. And so he's turning it again completely around. I have suffered all these things ultimately for the spreading of the gospel. And you can again see the fruit of my work is the churches I set up, the people I brought into the knowledge of God. Why would he have often gone without sleep? What was going on there? Why would he say that?
Because he's always on the move.
He was always on the move, but remember, he worked during the day to support himself, so what would he be doing at night?
Preaching.
Preaching. So he did his occupation during the day, in the evening, he would, he would be preaching. There was a story in Acts again where he was preaching so long that this boy fell asleep and fell out of the window. I don't know if you remember that story from Acts, and he went down and revived the boy. And so he obviously was speaking for a long time. We don't allow our pastors to do that anymore. I haven't seen anybody fall out of one of our chairs in a while.
Not yet.
At least nobody fell out of the window. So he's again showing that he suffered for the gospel. This is a parody of what they would have been saying how good they were, his rivals were. And I lost track. I think it's Jim 28, please.
Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches.
So the last verse talked about external things happening to him. He's now talking about internal things. So why would what kind of pressure, what kind of concern do you think he had?
That the churches would continue in his absence.
Yeah. So he felt it's a responsibility to the churches that he set up. And he couldn't call them up on their cell phone, so he wrote them letters, which is what we have. And so all his letters that we have show concern with the churches, and that's why they're often, almost all of them, called by the church he sent a letter to. We're dealing with 2 Corinthians, he wrote to the Ephesians, he wrote to the Galatians, he wrote to the Romans, and so all his letters basically show his concern for the church that he set up, and trying to deal with his anxiety about what was going on with it in one way or another, because they all are basically him being worried about the church enough that he sent them a letter about some issue that was going on with them. Okay, 30 please. I think it's Larry.
It's 29.
Okay.
Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led to sin and I do not inwardly burn?
And so he's again showing his weakness. His weakness then shows whose strength. Paul was weak. He's showing God's strength. So I suffered all these things. I am weak, but I've been mighty in the Word, and where my strength comes from is from the Lord. Okay, Lance 30, please.
If boasting is necessary, I will boast about my weaknesses.
Okay, so he's going to be wrapping up his foolish speech. He's saying, if I need to do this for you, I will do it. Okay, you can take off. I was going to close in the next two verses, but I know you want to get set up. Lake 31?
The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying.
Okay. So who is important? God. And so God is his witness that what he's saying is true.
Is that what they're saying? With God is my witness.
And so we'll finish up with 32 and 33, Dennis.
In Damascus, the governor under the king Aretas had the city of Damascene guarded in order to arrest me. But I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through the hand.
And again, this story comes out of Acts, where the king wanted to arrest him for civil disobedience and had guards at the gate, so they lowered him in a basket. out a window. This happened back in the time Israel was coming in. Remember the spies that Joshua had sent into one of the cities had been by a prostitute led out of the city by luring him. So what kind of strength does this show that you had to be lowered out of the town in a basket, hidden in the basket, lowered with a rope? Does this show strength? No. If you were, if you had strength, you would walk through the guards, you would walk out through the gates, have a procession and a band. So he's saying, I was weak enough that to save myself, I had to be dropped out of the window over the walls in a basket to run away. So he's saying that. And so we'll stop here and continue next time. I'll try to figure out that 30, 40 minus 1, or I don't know where that came from. So, Mel, can you close this with prayer tonight? A short prayer, please.
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today for this fellowship. Please keep us safe during these holiday seasons. Watch over us and help us enjoy each other's company, our church family, and our families at home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you some homework. I'm going to ask next Sunday what next book you would like to study. It could be one of the New Testaments. If you want to do something else, please don't pick Jeremiah. We'll be here forever. But if you want a particular book, we can talk about it next time. This allows me, if I don't have the commentators' books, to look up the stuff. Like, this is where I get all my, and I'm that smart, I just read it ahead of time, just like Larry picked up the rods. And so it gives me time to order something. So if something you really want to study, I'm going to be honest, I've always had trouble with the last book of the Bible, understanding that. I've gone through a couple studies, not my own, but somebody else's. I just have a hard time with that. But I
Did you
could
want
give
to
it,
switch to the Old Testament?
if you want something.
Oh, it
Yeah,
doesn't
I've
matter.
done, I've done the Minor Prophets, and I've done the Chronicles. And so I have those, but if you want something else, I'd be happy, I can order something and get going on that. But I need a little time to get the books from Amazon. So something you really want to study, think about it, pray about it, and then we can talk about it and see what the consensus is next time. But I think if somebody's really hot to study a particular book, probably everybody will go with that. So it can be New or Old Testament. I make a joke about Jeremiah because that's the longest book in the Bible, and it take us a long time to go through that. But if that's what you want, we can do that. Okay. Okay, so I'll see you next Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.